the big wake-up call was, how did this one thing that helped me out so much in a time of need when I felt like I
Mm,
couldn't really do anything right is now
mm,
absolutely kicking every single sort of like ADD and ADHD neurons with like full force. AI sloth being just all of these obnoxious videos that are brightly colored, built to hold and retain your attention, and it just essentially being a massive amount of fatigue that doesn't leave you happier. It doesn't make you feel like you've learned anything of value. It just makes you feel like you have to constantly have a flashlight, literally just a flashlight, just brightly shining at your face and constantly leaving you tired. You see a lot of big C-level executives, and you see a lot of tech bros and big giant tech firm aficionados that are saying, you don't need to get a degree, you don't need to go to college, you can just simply learn AI. But then ask yourself this,
mm.
if that's the case, then why are a lot of these tech bros and billionaires sending their children to universities to learn how to think critically? And you want to know the funniest thing, and this is why it works so hand in hand with cybersecurity, is because that constant fatigue, that constant disorganization where you're just constantly fed a bunch of noise, this is like peanut butter and jelly for hackers and threat actors and essentially a lot of malicious individuals that want to take advantage of victims online, because you're constantly getting bombarded. You're not necessarily using your best judgment when you're constantly getting on edge.
Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Humor Career Insights. Today's guest is Omar Chaudhry, a cybersecurity specialist and technology ethicist dedicated to making the digital world more secure, ethical, and accessible for everyone. Since 2022, he has used his background to help government agencies and NGOs implement security audits, engineer solutions within risk frameworks, and further tech literacy initiatives. His work is driven by a belief that technology should serve humanity without compromising our well-being or security. He's currently based in Nairobi, Kenya, and partners with global organizations ready to embrace responsible technology. He believes that we can build a digital world that serves us all. Omar, welcome to Humor Career Insights.
Thank you so much for having me on the show, Bacha. I really appreciate it. And I'm really excited to definitely talk with you about the whole concept of technology ethics, because I'm sure that not that many people really hear the words together, especially in this day and age where it feels more predatory than ever, but it feels more important, but also more dissuading. And it really feels like a huge tidal wave, I'm guessing, no?
Yes, very much so. And you've just led into that question of technology and ethics put together. You call yourself a technology ethicist.
Exactly.
Tell me tell me what that is.
Absolutely. So, in the instance of technology ethics, what I was getting into what inspired me to get into tech ethics specifically is the fact that I, in 2012, got my first smartphone. And as someone with ADD and ADHD, it was a godsend when it came to taking all of that noise, that mental noise, and being able to just put it into a phone. Any notes, any sort of reminders, any events, just set it and forget it, and then let it come to you when it is necessary. And even so with artificial intelligence in 2020, just seeing huge dumps of information, just being able to search and index at your fingertips and even have a conversation with maybe just a very boring document. That sounds like something straight from the future that's really exciting. Fast forward to today in 2026, and you hear the word smartphone and artificial intelligence. Be honest. What comes to your mind?
Okay.
I guess that sums it
Yeah.
up. That sums it up.
Yes,
Bang on.
exactly. My goodness, you
That
cannot.
was
Hey,
not,
that's just like that
we did
worked
not
out
plan
pretty
that,
well.
by the way.
No, that was not planned. And at this point, I will
Please.
put my phone on airplane mode. I will definitely.
Yeah, to answer the question about technology ethics, in a way, we're trying to focus more on purposeful tech and just letting it serve the purpose that we specifically need it to facilitate. And say, for example, at the end of the day, a phone is just to communicate with someone that you're trying to get a
Mm,
hold of. So if
mm.
you take away all of those fancy trimmings and all these really cool features, ultimately you want to do is just communicate or maybe
Yeah.
get organized. In fact, funnily enough, talking about purposeful tech, I'm just going to definitely show you on the webcam something I brought
Mhm.
that I started using in the age of 2026, a full-on Palm Pilot. I swear to God, this thing is actually older than my nephew. So I do feel kind of embarrassed to say it, but like, how is it that this 20-year-old gizmo that doesn't even connect to the internet, how is this serving more of a purpose and making me more productive than something like this that actually has a specific use case and is almost compulsory in this day and age?
Mm, because, well, it doesn't give us rest. We are bombarded from all angles. You go on your smartphone to do something, a WhatsApp comes in, like just now, a call comes in when you really are trying to either work on your phone, send emails, you cannot focus. That smartphone does not allow you any rest. It does not allow your nervous system any rest. It does not allow your brain any rest. It's just constantly bombarding us. At least that's my experience with the smartphone. What I've had to do now is if I'm working on a document, I switch off my phone or I put it like now, I've just put it on airplane mode, right, to make me not reachable. Otherwise, it's a constant barrage of everything.
And you want to know the funniest thing, and this is why it works so hand in hand with cybersecurity, is because that constant
Mm,
fatigue, that constant disorganization where you're just constantly fed a bunch of noise, this is like peanut butter and jelly for hackers and threat actors, and essentially a lot of malicious individuals that want to take advantage of victims online because you're constantly getting bombarded. You're not necessarily using your best judgment when you're
mm,
constantly getting on edge.
mm. Yes. And then, um, talking about well-being and security pertaining to technology. Here's a question from my experience. Of late, I have been getting constant spam calls, like constant. I constant. My kids even now say they'll look at my phone and they'll say, "Mommy, it's spam calling," or "It's suspected spam calling." That is how bad it's become. I don't answer my calls anymore unless if it clearly says, who is calling because of that. What has that to do with uh, ethics in technology or cybersecurity? Is there anything there?
Actually, it's kind of interesting because cybersecurity, when you hear the cyber part, you just kind of
Mm,
think, oh, this only is just simply bound by the annals of technology. In terms of anything involving my day-to-day life, life outside the smartphone, you like to think
mhm,
that's not where cybersecurity lays out. But cybersecurity or as security studies in general, that absolutely envelopes the entirety of your day-to-day operations. So when you look at these spam calls that you're getting, all it takes is
mhm,
just maybe someone in your contacts list to get compromised. I know when I was over in my homeowners association, I noticed I got a bunch of spam calls trying to
mhm,
masquerade as the homeowners association, most likely because even though I'm being relatively safe with my phone number and my online presence, That's not to say that someone that you're friends with and someone that you have on speed dial isn't going to end up being compromised. All it just takes is just that one friend or that one coworker, that one intern to absolutely drop the ball. But that is simply something that isn't their fault. It's not your fault. That's just the way that, life operates. That's how it's engineered, where some sort of imperfection can still just leave you exposed.
Back to the conversation on the career journey. How did you find yourself in cybersecurity?
This is actually a really interesting topic because, truth be told, even though I've always been a tech nerd, I've always been fidgeting around with computers, even when I was young, I never actually got into a tech career up until maybe my mid to late 20s. Because, in all honesty, I am not a programmer. I'm not a software coder. I can't necessarily just conjure up a program or a video game out of my own bare hands and a keyboard. And I realized through cybersecurity that's perfectly fine. If you can have some semblance and some understanding about coding and programming, you don't necessarily need to build the house with hammer and nails. You can also just be a window inspector. You can also check on the lighting. And that's what cybersecurity comes into play, and specifically in tech as far as a career goes. Because I remember in the mid 2010s or so, the big 3-word sentence that anyone in looking into a formidable career was learn to code, get into tech. Specifically, learn to code was such a frustrating sentence to hear, as if like that was going to solve all your problems, when in reality it requires a lot more nuance and it requires a lot more breadth and depth when it comes to going into technology, because of course it's a huge rapid expanse that constantly has all these different dimensions that we can go into.
So was cybersecurity then something that you moved into because you saw what was wrong in the technology world?
Honestly, the reason why I went into cybersecurity was a bit of a gamble, truth be told, because in the pandemic, I somehow ended up with $30,000. And basically, I thought to myself, right now, the world is in a complete level of disarray. How can I get this money off my hands? Because I knew that I couldn't be trusted with it. So, what better way to burn tens of thousands of dollars than to grad school?
I should have met you then. I may have given you ideas on how we could burn that money.
Oh my goodness, it was quite hilarious. So ultimately, I decided to get this master's in cybersecurity in the pandemic just because I thought to myself, all right, listen, I'm not doing anything and I don't think the world is doing anything. So why not just essentially take a chance at this in a field that, truth be told, I had no prior formal experience in, and slowly going into it just from a technology enthusiast perspective, slowly creeping in, it did have that riding a bike feeling where you essentially start realizing now that you're viewing this as a formal, applied practice, you get to approach your day to day operations with tech in general in a more in a more, I guess you could say, security a more security oriented perspective, because I'm willing to bet that whether it was like in the 70s, 80s, or 90s, it was all just about moving fast and breaking things. But now we're starting to move into the perspective of that kind of mentality does cause a lot of long-term damage. This isn't the internet that millennials grew up with, which was just filled with a lot of collaboration and creativity. It's a huge commodity now that has a lot of malicious individuals that want to exploit it. And in a way, looking into cybersecurity as a career we're starting to essentially look into it and see all these burgeoning technologies and more specifically say, okay, how do we baby proof this thing? Because chances are this isn't going to be very safe from, I guess you could say, from a large level perspective. Maybe it'll be safe with 100 tech-minded nerds that know
Mm.
how to operate within this specific
Yeah.
framework or with this new technology or even AI. But you get 1 million people that are just the general public and they get their hands on it. How much you want to bet that when they break something, it's going to cause a major rift?
Possibly, I could make quite a lot of money betting that it will happen.
Exactly. No, I completely agree, especially since we see a lot of tech giants that are trying to bet heavily, specifically on some of the emergent technologies like, say, AI, and even
Mm,
way back when cloud computing was on the rise. And we were just thinking to ourselves, okay, let's just keep everything in the cloud. We don't have to
yeah.
worry about our computer getting wet or getting broken. It's all in the cloud.
Mm,
And then we had that huge blackout with Amazon Web Services. Some
yeah.
computer at some point or in the other is going to, something bad is
Yeah.
going to happen and it's going to leave a pretty big footprint. So at the end of the
Mm,
day, that's where cybersecurity really rests itself. And I find it to be more important than ever, not even to be a cybersecurity specialist and be so well versed in the
mhm.
technology, but basic practices that, truth be told, were very common back in the early days of the internet that are now kind of glossed over, especially when you see large age ranges from children to older adults just getting online.
Okay. 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 So you worked across government, NGOs, and also in the education sector, and now you move towards independent consulting and also advisory work. What pushed you towards that, and how are you finding that landscape as an independent consultant?
Actually, the interesting thing is that when I was working first over at the Consortium of School Networking in a fellowship
Mm,
where I worked specifically with a lot of school districts, departments of technology for certain public schools and private schools, I then moved later to work into the National Association of Counties, which was a nonprofit organization that assisted local government that assisted local governments. And then later, over in the United States Environmental Protection Agency, I actually relocated to Nairobi for my wife's offer in in a nonprofit organization. And being a trailing spouse, as I am, it does
mm,
uproot your career and you have to pivot
mm.
and work within your skill set. And I didn't want to just all of a sudden abandon this new field that I was enamored with. And I realized, hey, this is a fit for me. And so in the midst of constantly applying for a bunch of tech careers, and then you see this big tech implosion in the age of AI where you have massive layoffs on big companies. I remember even, I think, what was it? Meta laid off 1,000 employees, Amazon laid off 14,000 recently, I think. And the ironic thing is that we need more technically skilled employees more than ever, rather than just mindlessly allowing AI to take their jobs. We need people with judgment and personal accountability in order to be in these roles, something that an AI can never involve themselves with. As for getting me into consulting, that was simply a case of me wanting to continue to do what I want to do. I actually
Mm,
am working in the process of publishing a book talking about tech literacy exactly, but I wanted to get more involved in my field and in my work and specifically what I did. And the interesting thing I learned as an expat spouse is that there is no specific barrier to entry. There's no board certification you need as a consultant. You just need the experience. And what I've decided to do is that if you have the certifications, Say, for example, and this is a thing in cybersecurity, is that it's all based off of certifications. If you have necessary certifications that show that you're proficient in a certain industry, in a certain form of software, or even just how many years of experiences you have on the field, that's kind of all you really need. And then if you can help people around, that's all that really matters. And that's the beauty of being a consultant, is that it's not just being your own boss, but also you get to decide who you want to help.
Yeah, yeah. I like that. Two things from the reinvention as a result of being a trailing spouse, which is part of my journey. When I talk about there's an episode in a prior season where I talk about how I got to do what I do, and it was a direct result of having to reinvent myself because I'm a trailing spouse. So advantages and disadvantages to that, which we should have another conversation about at a later date, isn't it?
I would love to, honestly. It's been so exciting to definitely chat with you. So anytime I get to talk about this more, I'd be more stoked for. So I'm really excited for that in that regard.
This episode is brought to you by Humor, the boutique career and leadership consultancy helping professionals get clear, get confident, and get hired. From CV writing and Clifton Strengths coaching to interview prep and leadership development, Humor is here to help you take the next step in your career. Visit humor.org to learn more. www.humhr.org. In your intro, earlier you mentioned that the smartphone was of great help to you because of the ADD and the ADHD. And I was thinking about technology and inclusivity, and how one of the things that you are driven by is the belief that technology should serve humanity without compromising our well-being. Is that is that a result of that? Is that because of that experience that you are driven to push this agenda?
Honestly, I would say that that was the thing that really sort of like turned the gears specifically. And it wasn't even so much how much the smartphone helped me, so much as it was
Mm,
seeing it sort of decay into turning this giant addiction machine, something that I would probably no longer recommend to someone who has ADD or ADHD. So
mm-hmm,
the big wake up call was, how did this one thing that helped me out so much in a time of need when I felt like I couldn't really do anything right, is now
mm-hmm,
absolutely kicking every single sort of like ADD and ADHD neurons with like full force. How did it turn into just this thing that leaves me fatigued? It leaves people who don't have ADHD into
yeah,
constant fatigue as well. It feels more like just an addiction rather than an aid. And that's what kind of got me back into this sort of old school technology that never seems
yeah.
to have transformed itself into something really gross and yucky. I mean, looking back, we seem to have had an era that came and went with purposeful tech that appeared to have helped us a lot more and serve its purpose and compartmentalize itself so that way we can get more of what we want in our lives.
Mm, mm, yeah. So the evolving, um, initially it comes out in a good way, right? Which you can actually then look at it in terms of AI. It starts off serving humanity, and then it evolves or morphs into something that is no longer serving us very well. And then how to ensure that it maintains what it's meant to do, right? It's meant to serve, it's meant to help us, it's meant to, yeah. So
Right. Like exactly.
initially,
How did we go from artificial intelligence being this incredible, always on tutor that's there to guide us and help us to
mm,
basically something that is drying up all of the drinking water we have in the world and just filling our minds with a bunch of AI slop. AI slop being just all of these obnoxious videos that are brightly colored, built to only
Yeah.
hold and retain your attention, and just essentially being a massive amount of fatigue that doesn't leave you happier. It doesn't make you feel like you've learned anything of value. It just makes you feel like you have to constantly have a flashlight, literally just a flashlight, just brightly shining at your face and constantly leaving you tired.
Yes, yes. Not meant for our well-being at all. And this is where the intersect is with being a technology ethicist. Now, here's my question to you. How many of you are there out there in the world? And is it, okay, you might not be able to answer it exactly, but
Yes, that's fine.
my question,
I have a
yeah.
good answer for this actually.
Okay. Yeah.
You know,
So, uh-huh.
oh no, just in the sense of, I remember, ironically enough, on Instagram, I've seen a lot of cybersecurity specialists that go into content creation talking about their sort of, I guess you could say, their dilemmas that they've been dealing with in terms of technology. For
Yeah.
example, MIT graduate and former Google employee Madeline Zhang, who has, I believe, about, I don't know, a little over 1 million followers on YouTube and Instagram, and Catarina Doria, this Brazilian AI ethicist, who also is one of, I believe, one of the top 100 women in AI. And
Mm,
when I see their profiles, I almost kind of thought to myself, I want to walk the road that these women are walking. Or say, for example, I want to see what all of these other cybersecurity specialists are doing. And a lot of them seem to have the same frustrations that I have, which is also why I, ironically enough, started getting into content creation myself in between the
mm,
consulting, because it also is a great way to sort of express your concerns as an expert without having the need to charge. You're more specifically focused on just trying to get a public message out there as an
yes.
experienced individual and a professional in your field.
Like a thought leader.
Exactly. Exactly. And
Mm,
taking sort of, it almost feels like that one pivot that you're taking your skill set and mostly focusing on the one social media platform or platforms that
mm,
initially were something that you were against, and just using this more as trying to treat it as your soapbox to actually talk about genuine concerns that you have with the world. I remember thinking to
yeah.
myself, I never want to go onto Instagram again. Yet somehow, ironically enough, in the past 2, 3 months or so, I started posting videos talking about my concerns as a cybersecurity specialist and
Yeah.
technology ethicist. And I thought to myself, this is a very interesting full circle revolution that we're getting with, and it was so fun to see that I'm not the only one who is going this route as well, especially seeing other cybersecurity and tech influencers in social media.
Yeah. I think social media is something that we we can deny but not ignore.
Exactly. And here's the interesting thing. I feel like younger generations, they can catch on quick to, say, for example, this deterioration of how major social media platforms have turned more into a commodity rather than a means of trying to communicate. And you see a lot of younger generations that are wanting to, say, for example, move from smartphones to dumb phones and use older technology like point and shoot cameras and MP3 players because they want to
Yeah.
build some form of digital agency rather than live into this mindset of you will own nothing, only subscriptions, and you will have zero equity in this world. Which I think, as a millennial, I'm really glad to see a lot of Generation Z and hopefully Generation Alpha to rise up and understand that this is the way to go in terms of trying to reclaim any sort of equity or agency, especially in cyberspace.
Mm. So, where do you think, where are we failing? Right? I did not know, for one, that this whole AI blow up, this whole AI generation had led to huge water bodies disappearing. And that's affecting a lot of communities until you mentioned it. So I wondered,
Oh, I'll tell you that.
but I wondered if that knowledge is widespread, right? Maybe I would make a different choice in using certain things if I knew, or people would make different choices if they knew, right? But where are we failing with AI and serving humanity?
Oh, absolutely. So the thing is that AI, a lot of people are trying to treat this as this magic genie that'll fulfill all our fantasies and answer all our questions. But that large, expansive AI and those large language models, they take a lot of electricity. They use up a lot of water and resources.
Mhm.
But when we scale back to focusing on purposeful tech, say, for example, using a large, not necessarily even a large language model that is 120 billion parameters, like the big LLMs that OpenAI and Claude and Google and Facebook use, who's to say that an 8 billion model that can run locally on your computer? And I'm willing to bet if you have a computer that you probably purchased in the last 5 years or so, it can absolutely run a local artificial intelligence on its own perfectly fine and answer maybe 80 to 90% of your questions that you would normally otherwise ask.
Mhm. That's true. That is true. You find yourself now, okay, so Chat GPT has replaced Google to some extent, right? So before we would ask Google, now it's like, hey, let me just ask Chat GPT. A prime example, I was having a problem with my Windows Media Player yesterday. I downloaded something and Windows Media Player it couldn't read it. And my go-to is my husband, because he's a tech person. Of course, he's no longer really doing the actual tech at this point, but he's my go-to. So I said, I'm having this problem, and he was like, I'm not sure. I don't know what's going on. Just send me the error message and I'll look at it. And it was it was I was not going to wait. We've become impatient, right? We've become so impatient. We need our answer immediately because of Google, because of ChatGPT. So he said to me, I'll get back. Just send me the error message, and then I'll look at it and I'll let you know. And I was like, oh, no, 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 no. Okay, I'm not going to wait for this. Went to ChatGPT and said, hey, what's going on? This is the problem I'm having with my Windows player, with my media player. And they are very quick, very quick. And, it gratified my, my
Exactly.
mind.
Want to know the funniest thing is that
Yeah.
who's to say that this chat GPT answer is completely correct? All chat GPT or most artificial intelligences are really doing is they are just confident, they are providing a confident answer, not necessarily an accurate answer. Maybe it might probably satiate that impulse and that impatience. Yes, but
Yes.
you're also losing a lot of that personal thinking power that you would have otherwise used on your own to look something up, to also
Mm.
specifically figure out what sort of methodology, what sort of documentation should I be reading. And therein lies the big dearth and the big warning sign that we should see with AI. So while we could use it as this infinitely patient teacher that we have at our
Mm.
fingertips, we seem to be really tempted to just have the infinitely available butler that will just provide an answer. The
Yes.
Exactly.
Yes, we don't have to think. And, I mean, I realized that myself when I was like, I'm now at the point where I'm not patient. I don't want to learn, and I did this quickly. It gave me a recommendation. Just download this. I quickly downloaded it. And then now, my husband came back and he was like, okay, I'm waiting for, I was like, no, never mind. Don't worry. ChatGPT helped me out, and I downloaded a new. And he was really concerned. I was like, "What did you download?" And you know,
And you want to know the funniest thing about all this? You see a lot of big C-level executives, and you see a lot of tech bros and big giant tech firm aficionados that are saying, you don't need to get a degree. You don't need to go to college. You can just simply learn AI. But then ask yourself this.
Mm.
If that's the case, then why are a lot of these tech bros and billionaires sending their children to universities to learn how to think critically? Knowledge is power, in my opinion. And that, I think, comes into play as a technology ethicist and understanding that, yes, you could essentially create those conveniences for you, but you're also missing out on things like being able to critically think, which,
Mm.
ironically enough, is the one thing that you do learn specifically over in like universities, the one thing that a lot of tech firms are starting to dissuade general consumers for. That, hey, you could probably use Chat GPT to substitute any form of education. And that is the biggest warning sign ever. Because guess what? Chat GPT never had to actively do some critical thinking. It never had to go through that human accountability and specifically pass judgment. It never had to actively create an original thought. It just simply had to pretend to give an original thought. And a lot of us
Mm.
are submitting ourselves personally in order to just dumb ourselves down and outsource ChatGPTs for some vital functions that our brains specifically rely on.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, so the fine line, right, Omar, between making it my assistant, making it my helper, to making it me, to making it,
Exactly. Bingo.
yeah.
You got it. Thank
Mm.
you. You honestly have just absolutely nailed it. That AI can go from something that can help us and aid us and guide us in terms of learning something, or we could just essentially have it do everything that we wanted to do on our own. Whether it
Mm.
was, say, for example, create a piece of music or write a story or even
Yes,
paint a
yes.
picture or do a drawing. If you're going to outsource AI to do all of those things that you personally wanted to do, you're just going to let AI consume you in the way that a lot of big tech billionaires are going to want you to essentially use their technology with, because what they see is now someone who has built an unhealthy relationship with a subscription price.
Mm.
What happens when you cannot pay $20 a month because you outsourced all of your creativity and all of your thinking power to an AI? All of a sudden, you're kind of just boxing yourself in a corner. And the truth is, just simply follow the money. Because when you look
Mm.
at yourself in terms of the big sort of, I guess you could say, when you're looking at that huge divide, that what does the CEO see when he sees someone that is subscribed for $20 a month? Are you seeing someone who is using this as a therapist? Are you seeing someone that is using this as a partner? Think of it like using Legos. Would you want to use
Yeah.
Legos to, say, for example, build an alarm clock? Cool, sure, fine. Would you use Legos in order to build your therapist, your romantic partner, or maybe probably your professor? No, it sounds almost borderline insane, but that's what we're essentially gearing ourselves towards if we don't use technology responsibly, hence the ethics in technology ethics.
Mm, it makes sense. I think we've done a huge practical explanation, right? A practical definition of a technology ethicist, and in terms of the mix now, or the technology ethicist and cybersecurity, how the two come together.
Exactly. No, it's interesting because you can see that at first they seem like two completely different fields, but as you
Yes.
slowly realize, specifically with AI, I think, you start to see them converge and realize where the exploitation dynamic lies
Mm,
between those two.
mm. And then one of the talks, you have talks, and one of the talks is on AI and kids and how it's entered the classroom, right? And I begin to see, like, this conversation where it's like, where you are using AI to, to take over the critical thinking, to take over the skill set, how where your concern is, right? With it
Mm.
entering our kids, entering the classroom really early, it just means that kids will never learn. They'll never learn how to solve problems. They'll never learn critical thinking. They'll never learn how to write. Will they learn how to write? They learn how to,
Sad reality is that artificial intelligence, when used properly, can be a
hmm
fantastic teacher for some kids, especially kids with learning difficulties. I mean,
Yes.
I tried something really ridiculous where I basically asked some question about teach me this specific concept. I don't remember if it was like quantum computing or
hmm
some form of encryption, something I didn't understand. And I basically
hmm
said, explain it to me using video game terminology. And I get this lovely explanation and example that talks about it the same way you would talk about some sort of video game that I've played prior. And it just makes sense to me. And it's spelling it out to me in a way that is understanding towards me. And if this can wow me, I can imagine that some kid that is just struggling in school will have a tutor that is available to teach them 24/7 if they know how to use the technology responsibly, as opposed to, say, generating content, generating something that they should be using their creativity towards.
Yeah, yeah. Moving, like, from a useful tool. There are useful tools in kids' education, right? Like, we have the the different teaching things. There's the one, it skips my mind, like testing mom, and there's another one that's adapted mind. There's a lot of different ones
I'm
that
writing some
they
down in my Palm Pilot.
yes, adapted mind. They, it has like an AI teacher, basically an AI tutor for kids. They'll log in and it will help them with maths, and they will do exercises, and it will say well done or incorrect, things like that, and then it will actually, yeah. So I think that fine line between it being a teacher to help you learn to it doing things for you so that you don't learn.
Oh, yeah, yeah, yeah. As far as like seeing that fine line, the sad reality is
Mm,
that I don't think kids are going to be able to discern that on their own. Young adults maybe,
mm,
but overall, I think the golden rule specifically being is that as far as AI, in fact, most internet usage, I would probably say that kids definitely need to have a lot more controlled technology usage before they can start understanding and implementing it on their own. So while it would be great to have kids actively understand and learn how to use I just feel, in my experience, I only know so much in terms of technology, but I would probably say if it does kind of feel a little bit suspicious, it's always better to err on the side of caution, especially when they're younger.
yeah, yeah, yeah. Omar, thank you for your time today. But I want to talk a little bit about hard truths and career lessons before we end our time together. I think it's been almost an hour.
Oh my goodness.
So, yeah, it has been the
Live.
conversation. Mm, mm. What has been the most difficult professional moment in your career so far?
I would probably have to say, and I feel really bad for saying this, but specifically working with, I don't want to say necessarily executives or project managers or product
Mm.
managers, but just essentially cybersecurity, specifically working in tech support or as an IT technical support analyst. You're dealing with customers. It's a customer service role, and you're dealing with a lot of customers who are belligerent and trying to see that frustration at the end of the day, especially when they are struggling, not unlike yourself. It is definitely tough to say, all right, I understand, completely agree with you. Hang on a second. I've been that person as well, especially when I talk to tech support. When I've talked to Google tech support specifically, I
Yeah.
have been exactly the customer that I have dealt with a many a times. And it is a frustration, but I guess it's a fact of life.
How do you bring leaders or project managers from point A to point B, right? From like uh, just the theory of technology, ethics, cybersecurity to like the real practical on the ground application.
I would say that it's a completely scalable aspect because sometimes you'll have C-level executives that are absolutely in tune. They completely understand tech. They grew up programming.
Mm.
There are plenty of those CEOs and CTOs that exist. However, you also do have non-technical C-level executives, and you do have to adapt with them. So even though I want to give a clear-cut answer, the real reality is that it's a completely sliding scale. Some people don't want to be talked down to and be overly, I guess you could say, mansplained when it comes to certain technical concepts,
Mm.
especially when they work in the field. Whereas some people, they do need extra explanation because they're not technical people. And it is ultimately dependent on them. But that is something that you have to just simply learn from getting an impression on them, reading them as people, and more specifically, just simply asking that, hey, just a quick question. Are you specifically familiar with quantum computing? Or just a quick question before we continue on. I just want to know, what do you know about network administration or cloud computing? It's just an honest question. And if they just say
Mm.
completely clueless to, are you serious?
Mm.
I've worked at Cisco for 10 years.
Yeah,
It's not,
yeah,
worst
yeah.
thing they're going to do is just be the worst thing they can do is be insulted.
Mm, mm. Yeah, right? And we can get over insults.
Oh yeah, no, I've definitely been the butt end in that regard. So that was a learning lesson.
Okay. No, thank you for that. Have you ever had to push back the when ethics conflicted with like, speed, profit?
I mean, the thing is, at this point, when you see a lot of people leaving tech giants, I think probably the better move would be going towards startup organizations because I feel like with startup organizations, you can talk with founders, you could talk with higher ups and actively have an honest discussion with them. Whereas with bigger, say, for example, the FANG, Facebook, Amazon, Apple, Netflix, Google, you're dealing with a board of directors. For some other big organizations, you're dealing with private equity firms. And ultimately, down the line, the only thing that focuses is the bottom line and ultimately what profits are. So I think if you do get frustrated with seeing that ethical line being crossed, especially with big tech, the best thing you could do is leave and be more mindful because you're dealing with a board of
Yeah.
directors and a board of stakeholders that only just want to see the stock price go up and right.
Yeah. 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 Profit over purpose.
Exactly. But
Mm.
the thing that really makes me excited about all this is that this allows us to create more creative solutions. This might even allow us to think and walk backwards. I mean, it's the
Yeah.
reason why I started using a lot more older technology. It's why I start looking to a lot of startup organizations and speaking with tech gurus and tech founders and possibly see those alternatives that wouldn't otherwise be visible because we are just so wrapped up in our industry standards. I mean, for the most part, I remember before I go into any further detail, am I allowed to name
Yeah.
drop specific organizations? Nope. No hold barred. Spotify isn't going to
Okay.
have a knife to my neck, I guess, right? So my wife and I
Mm.
dropped Spotify actually because we found out that they were partnering up with I forgot the name of the organization. I think it was Helsing, and they started partnering with working with AI drone warfare technology. Awful stuff.
Mm.
Absolutely terrible
Okay.
stuff. But
Mm.
because of them, I started learning about other alternatives, say, for example,
Mm.
Kubotz, which also focuses on properly paying recording artists a fair share and a fair amount, and not being involved with a lot of shady practices, which I think is only just going to, as we see a lot of users
Yeah.
being frustrated with big tech, not just ethically, but also
Mm.
functionally. Lord knows that we are dealing with a lot. Like, for example, our phones aren't going to get any more convenient. I'll tell you that. They're only just built to frustrate us. Google isn't going to be more helpful. It's going to try to find ways to keep us on the app, on their apps specifically.
Mm.
So
That's true.
as we're slowly backing away and rejecting those
Mm.
big tech platforms, we're going to slowly start gravitating to something that provides more agency and provides more power to the users, which is the exciting part, as opposed to just simply ultimately disillusioned with technology as a whole.
Mm. Yeah, as opposed to just rolling over and just saying, this is our lot.
Exactly. Absolutely.
Mm. 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 So, what role do you believe that ethicists such as yourself or cybersecurity specialists must play in the next decade as we see like this AI, we're seeing digital systems, we're seeing all this acceleration, all this like bombarding of just everything at us. Yeah, what role do you believe that ethicists and cybersecurity specialists must play?
I know you're expecting an answer just as much as I am because I'm looking for that answer myself. But the truth is, I could absolutely see it coming into play maybe in the next 2 years or so. There's going to be a slow realization after this AI bubble pops, whenever it pops, that we're going to
Yeah.
realize that actually we've been letting we've essentially just let a we've essentially let a giant power consuming Furby determine a lot of our major decisions. And a lot of people are going to realize that probably wasn't the smartest idea. We should have probably had humans make proper judgment calls rather than just a giant speak and spell that can confidently cosplay as whatever you needed it to be, whether it was a researcher or a therapist or a lover.
Yeah. Yeah, yeah, right. Funny you say that. Funny you actually say lover because I have a friend who said that Chat GPT is my boyfriend, and we laughed about it. Yeah, we laughed about it, right? But
Yeah, but
but
it's like actually a dangerous thing because
yes,
believe it or not, I don't know if you've actually read about a few articles that I think there was a study talking about AI psychosis is now an actual disease because people are building unhealthy, non-technical, non-organizational relationships with technology, specifically with ChatGPT, in order to sustain certain things that humans are supposed to do.
yes, because it was like, when I need to talk to someone in the middle of the night, I can't sleep. I talked to ChatGPT. I was like, like I said, we laughed about it, but when you really think about it, it's a problem.
hmm Imagine if
Mm.
you may, if you can't pay 20 bucks a month, then your partner leaves you. That's really scary. Like if I don't have 20 bucks in my pocket and then all of a sudden my wife leaves me, I'd be devastated.
Yeah, yeah,
And
yeah,
that's
yeah.
the thing that I think comes into play with artificial intelligence, that we realize we're crossing that ethical boundary, not just from the big tech organizations that honestly don't care, but also with
Mm,
ourselves and how we are using it.
mm, mm. Omar, what skill has mattered more than technical expertise in your journey?
In terms of, oh, and
Yeah, in
outside of
terms of like your
tech,
career. Yeah, outside of like, the knowledge, the technical expertise of cybersecurity and all that, what other skill has mattered?
I would say critical thinking easily without hesitation. It's the ability to just essentially something as simple as even just reading a book or maybe see a
Yeah.
satirical political cartoon and being able to
Mm,
pick up any sort of context by just asking those questions confidently and answering that. That is something, that is exactly why a lot of those tech billionaires and why a bunch of
mm,
the elite class, so to speak, goes out of their way to take their children and bring them to university so that way they can freely think critically. And that's something that I think a lot of people are going to take for granted, especially in the day and age of AI when we have AI doing a lot of mental tasks on our behalf. So, yeah, I would probably say thinking critically, that is probably the most important one so far.
because I know that technical careers, or technical roles, or people who do technical work tend to focus on just what do I need to know in terms of the work that I do, right? And all the other skills, the soft skills, we like to call them, really, they don't matter as long as I can code, or as long as I know the technical frameworks, right? As long as I know the risk frameworks, as long as I know security, then it doesn't matter. So I am happy to hear you talking about critical thinking being like one of the things that really mattered.
I mean, I remember back maybe even 10 or some odd years ago when liberal arts degrees were considered just a joke. But the truth is,
Mm.
if you look at things like, say, a philosophy degree, are we supposed to
Mm.
say that philosophy and maybe psychology or any of those all of those like liberal studies, are you telling me that they have no purpose in the world? Chances are
Mm.
that would be a very, very crazy thing to say. I mean, of course, we want to all get degrees and make a lot of money,
Yeah.
but that doesn't mean that we have to ignore and shirk the fact
Mm.
that there's a lot of human elements that we need to uphold and keep honing in this world. And critical thinking specifically is a great specific practice that you learn in these liberal arts degrees. But overall, you
Yeah.
learn it in college and in any sort of like 2 to 4 year university overall, because you're allowing yourself to think for yourself.
Mm. 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 For listeners considering a career in cybersecurity, tech ethics, or the advisory work that you do, what should they know before choosing this path? Or what one advice would you give to someone listening and thinking, that's what I want to do?
Oh, as in which path to take. So if you can't
Yeah.
necessarily afford if you can't necessarily afford a degree, which I understand is very cost prohibitive, I would probably say that you can go through a route of certifications, find an entry
Yeah.
level career path,
Mm.
which I believe some sort of certifications like the Certified Ethical Hacker, the CompTIA Security Plus, Cisco's
Yeah.
network certification. Then build your own projects on your own. Try to find,
Mm.
in my opinion, the easiest way to go in is to look for some sort of application like Hack the Box or Try Hack Me And you'll find a bunch of different learning modules that are structured in a way to at least get your foot into the right direction when you want to work in cybersecurity. And then from there, hopefully you can build your own projects personally. If you have a laptop or any sort of computer lying around, you can try to tinker around with it as what we call in cybersecurity a home lab. So that way you can try to figure out, how do I hack my own computer? And that way you don't necessarily get yourself in trouble because you're only experimenting with your own computer. And then slowly and steadily, you start to actually get enough reputation to start working in the tech sector.
Mm, mm, mm. Okay. Thank you for that advice. Um, when people look back at your work, what do you hope they say you helped protect or change?
Oh, what looking on my legacy in terms of like, what did I possibly change? Now that is
Mm.
really exciting because thinking down the line, well, I hope that they don't necessarily think about me as the crazy guy who started using a 30-year-old Palm Pilot. Oh my goodness. They're gonna see like a bunch of like these younger kids that are just going to ask their parents, "Hey, mom, dad, do you know where I can find a digicam or something like that? Where's your Walkman?" But I was proud.
Whoa, I had completely forgotten about those. They existed at some point. Walkmans.
You want to know the craziest thing? I got rid of all of the games on my smartphone and I started using a Game Boy. And it is crazy how long that thing. I remember being just a rambunctious child. That thing fell out of my backpack. I opened it up out of its box, and that thing was still working strong after a couple of AA batteries. So it was really funny just to essentially see that it was alive and kicking and just how resilient some of that purposeful tech was. But as far as talking about the
Mhm.
legacy goes, I think one thing that I'm hoping people will look back on me and essentially say that maybe I should have probably gone to college because this guy was definitely telling me to do so. And I promise I'm not being sponsored by any sort of higher education or college board or anything like that.
Okay, so Omar, thank you so much for your time today. And I must say, I have learned a few things today. And I think this is something that we need in this day and in this world that we live in. Ethics and technology ethics is it sounds like as when we started, we're coming full circle to how in the beginning we're like, how do the two even come together, right? And that's because there is none. We literally feel like it's anything goes these days in the technology space. And I think it's such a noble, such a needed space to work in right now, particularly for our kids who also cannot make the decisions that as adults we can make and have that sound judgment. um Thank you for joining us on Humor Career Insights. I usually have quick fire questions and I want to just go quickly into that and then I will let you go. So one myth about cybersecurity you wish would disappear.
It won't happen to me.
Biggest digital risk people underestimate.
I would probably say just keeping your Bluetooth and Wi-Fi on when you're not using it. If I could sum up my entire master's degree, close your ports when you're not using them.
Mm, mm, yeah, I need to do that. Um, Advice you'd give your younger self entering tech.
Keep tinkering with all of those gadgets that you have. And don't be afraid to unscrew the back end of your laptop.
Good advice. Good advice. Omar, thank you so much for your time today and a lovely conversation. I am hoping that you'll come back to talk a little bit more about that wellness, particularly with kids. I know that would have gone down another rabbit hole, but I would like to have that conversation.
Facha, it's been a real pleasure, and I just want to say thank you so much for having me on the show once again. This has been a delightful conversation.
Thank you. And to our listeners, thank you for joining us. And until next time, stay inspired.